Today we're starting a new unit on population dynamics. So I'm going to quickly go through some of this slideshow. Today I'll share the slideshow. There are some questions in it that I want you to try that I'll show you, and I'll kind of get you to pause the video, I guess, when you do those ones, and then try the questions, and then I'll have the answers after. Okay, so firstly, population ecology. Just as it says on the slides, talking about populations. And when we're talking about a population, if you remember from last year, population we're referring to in biology is a group of organisms of the same species living in the same area. So that's key. If you remember from grade 9, a community is when you have several different populations living together. So for example, in a pond, you have a population of frogs. If we're looking at population dynamics, we're looking specifically at the population of frogs and how it changes. Whereas if we're looking at the ecology of it or the community, we could be looking at the frogs, the birds, the fish, etc. And so the main things we're concerned about, I guess, are population density and population growth. And so there's a couple really easy formulas for this. So I'll skip right through. We're not going to, this unit I'm going to spend probably just this week and maybe part of next week on, and then we're going to get back into the units that we were supposed to do sequentially when we were in class. The reason why I've done this one in homeostasis is I was kind of hoping that we might be back at school at some point, and those ones would be better live, whereas this one and the homeostasis unit are a bit easier to teach through distance because they're not as complex. Okay. All right, so really simple. Members, looking at the members of a population, how they interact with their environment. That's population ecology. And we're looking at a size, looking at the number of individuals in a specific area at a specific time. First formula we're looking at is density. So pretty simple formula. If you want to know the population density, count the total number and divide it by the area. Okay, and that depends on, the total number is always going to be the same, but the space depends on what units you're doing. So if you're doing something like, I don't know, bacteria, you might do nanometers squared or millimeters squared. But then if you're doing, say, a forest, you might do like hectares, which is a unit of measuring for area. There's two types of density. The one that is the easiest to understand would be crude density. So like, let's say you're looking at moose, the number of, or the population of moose, or the population density of moose in Algonquin. You count all the moose in the total area divided by the total area of Algonquin Park. Whereas the ecological density in Algonquin, there's several lakes. A moose is not going to live in a lake. So the ecological density would be, okay, well, how many moose live in the actual forested areas or the clearings and not the lakes? And so that's the ecological density. So the area that's actually used by the organisms. There's different ways that populations are dispersed depending on the type of organism that they are on Earth. So the first one is clumped. So think of like a school of fish. That's a clumped dispersion. Uniform is where it's spread out equally with almost equal distance between each individual. And then the final one is random. Think of like a forest. There's trees like kind of all over the place. You can always tell if it's a natural forest versus a man-made forest because the natural forests are in this random pattern, whereas the human designed forests, you can see they're in neat kind of rows. And a lot of populations, if you think humans as an example, it depends. Okay, we're kind of all over the place. Our cities are clumped, but yeah, if you're at a beach, I guess you could be uniform. And then if you're looking at housing and where we live, then it would be uniform. So measuring population density, I mean, sometimes it's easy for us to just always think in human terms, but we're talking about all sorts of like living things. Some ways to do it would just be to kind of go around and count in an area. And the way you can count, because a lot of species are always moving and mobile. You could do, like for birds, you can count how many bird nests there are and estimate how many birds would live in a nest, or look at the amount of fecal droppings and know kind of like how old it is, and you could kind of estimate that way. Another way is using quadrats, so you kind of map out a specific area. This is mostly for either really small organisms, if you're looking at like say insects or plants. But yeah, anyways, you make quadrats, you make these squares, divide an area into squares and count the number of individuals in each square, and then divide by the total. So you might do a quadrat in one area of a forest and then in another area of forest and then a further one away. And then one that's a bit closer again. And so you have it in varying areas in the same general region. Okay, but the one we're going to focus on is a mark recapture method. And if you pause the video and open your textbook to page 501, you can see the formula for mark recapture. So the way that mark recapture works, it says 501. The way the mark recapture works is, so if you're looking in this instance like you see with the birds, you capture some birds, you tag them, you put that little tape around the leg of the bird, you release them, and then you come back at a later date, you collect birds again, and you compare the numbers of tagged birds, like some ones that you've recaptured versus ones that aren't tagged that you didn't capture the first time. And using the formula, you take the number that you had originally marked, let's say you marked 20, and you captured, say, like 6 the next time you went out. And let's say, you originally marked 20, okay? And then let's say you captured 100 birds the second time you went out. And then you divide it by the number of ones that were marked, okay? And that will give you your total. Okay, if you look in the textbook, it has like there was where's the example? So 50 warblers were captured. Okay, you see that's the second number in the numerator. And there were 20 that were originally marked. And you saw that in the ones that you captured the second time, that 10 of them had the tag on them, then divide it, and that means that your population of warblers in that area is 100. Okay, so here's just showing you, it's using different units. It's using symbols. So N is your population, and whenever you see an N in this unit, like a uppercase N, that's talking about population. M is the number that were marked. Okay, and then you have captured and recaptured. Okay, and so here's the formula. So you have, let's get the pointer. You have the N equals the number that you had marked originally, which was 12, the number that you captured in the second sample, which was 15, and how many had the tag on them. That was your little m, and that's the formula that you use in order to figure out the mark recapture. So pause the video and try to do the calculation for table 1 and table 2, and then we'll take up the answers. Okay, so I put the numbers there. So in the grasshoppers in the schoolyard, there's 4,550, and in the oil refiner, there's 1,312. So I rounded down, probably got 0.5. Round down because you can't have half of a grasshopper. It doesn't really count. Okay, so there's a question on page 508 in your textbook that I'm going to assign after. I'll give you some textbook questions to do. I think that's what some people had requested when I did that survey. Okay, so moving right along. Couple of things that affect population change now. So we're looking at that was population densities. Now we're starting to look at population change. So carrying capacity, if you might remember, is the maximum number of individuals an environment can support. So carrying capacity is kind of that point at which the resources available to a population. At that point, say like you can have 100 grasshoppers in a certain area. If they exceed that, then they've exceeded the number of resources. Then usually what can happen is there's going to be some kind of drastic population change, like a population crash. But some populations can stay at their carrying capacity. So you have the maximum number for the available resources provided, and they sort of stay there. So if it ever goes above it, then a few die off to bring it back down, and you kind of have a stable population. There are many things that can change how populations affect, and the carrying capacity can also change. As you can see, if you might know, kind of with humans, it seems that we've well exceeded our carrying capacity. At the end of the unit, they talk more about human populations, which were kind of an outlier because of our technology. But there's estimates that the resources available to the world, if we didn't exploit things the way that we do, probably the world could support about 500 million humans. So we've obviously well exceeded that. So there are some arguments that human population have gone well beyond carrying capacity. Okay, so there's different types of populations. Okay, and so when we're looking at the different types of populations, we can see we have something what are called survivorship curves. So a survivorship curve is a way, is kind of classifying different populations based on their sizes and the population size and relative age. And it's a way to sort of group things together. So type 1 survivorship shows you that a really, really high number of babies sort of survive early childhood. Okay, so the mortality rate of humans is really, really, really low now. So we're a type 1 population. Okay, a type 3 is the opposite of that, where a very low number of offspring survive. So you think of like seeds coming off of a tree. Okay, so like if you have an elm tree, there's not very many that survive. It drops lots and lots and lots of seeds, but only very, very few survive. And then you have a type 2 survivorship, which is kind of down in the middle. So birds, they have a clutch and a good portion, but not too many survive, and it's relatively constant, the survivorship throughout the course of the lifetime. So that's what the survivorship curve is. All right, show it again. Okay, and then the next thing to sort of talk about is biotic potential. There are many things. So biotic potential is a potential, like sort of the maximum potential of offspring a species can have in their lifetime. So I've done the example of humans here. This is hypothetical, and it's of course the limiting factor in human population size is the female, obviously, because they're the ones that females are the ones that get pregnant and have to carry the baby, and so it's limited by that. Like whereas males, kind of it's like an almost infinite number of potential offspring. So we're all, of course, limited by the one sex of species. The same with every species. So in a human female, you have a reproductive lifespan of about 43 years. Like this is very hypothetical. The other thing that plays into the biotic potential factor is the frequency of reproduction. I've sort of averaged it out that 43 years to you may be pregnant. Well, I guess that 43 years is 516 months, and maybe only pregnant every 18 months. Okay, realistically, okay, you're not going to be if you're a new mother, and you're nursing and all those kind of things. This is, I don't know. I don't remember exactly why I chose 18 months, but definitely 9 months is not realistic because of nursing, and nursing can go on for a couple of years, so it could be even longer, to be honest. The average sort of litter size of a human pregnancy is 1 child. The survival rate, there's a 0.57% mortality. So the average female woman, therefore, is a biotic potential of 28, which is, again, not realistic at all, but just gives you an idea. The important thing is all of these parts right here that feed into the biotic potential: the reproductive lifespan, the frequency of reproduction, the litter size, and the survival. So that's reproductive lifespan, not just lifespan, because not every species is able to reproduce right from birth. Again, case in point, humans. There are several that are, like you think of like a bacteria, the reproductive biotic potential of bacteria is extremely high, and that's why they can mutate so quickly. Okay, so let's skip this one. Now looking at sort of population changes again still. The way we measure the population change, you look at the number of births plus the number of immigrants. So if you're looking in a specific area, it's births and then new individuals coming into that area, subtract the number of deaths and individuals leaving that area, multiply that by 100 and divide by the initial population size, and you get a percentage value for the population change over time. This is known as an open population. Okay, so an open population means you have people or individuals that can come and go into a population. Whereas a closed population, you're only thinking of births and deaths. So let's say this is an island and we're looking at some kind of rodent, like, I don't know, a mouse on some island in the middle of the ocean. You're not going to have new mice that are going to be able to come in. You're not going to have mice that are going to be able to leave. If they go to try to leave the island, they're going to die. So they wouldn't count as immigrants. They would count as deaths. So that population change, you're only looking at births minus deaths times 100 divided by the initial population size. So pretty simple math here. Okay, so that's the contrast between open and closed populations. Okay, and then the last thing, and I have a couple of handouts to add, and I'm gonna have to pause this while I'm recording this to kind of go through the example, but I want to look at growth models. And so anyone who's like kind of in business or economics classes will kind of recognize some of these growth models. as a way to calculate compound interest. So the only reason I'm saying that is I think